Hey there, it's Robin, and you're listening to Healthy Habits for a Healthier Home. I'm here to help you create a healthier life, one simple shift at a time. If you're a mama ready to ditch toxins, clean up your family's nutrition, and build daily habits that support your well-being, you're definitely in the right place. Each episode is packed not only with education, but practical tips and tools to help you transform your health and your home without that feeling of overwhelm. So let's take this journey together to create a thriving, low-tox home for you and your family. If you're ready, say, I am ready. Now let's get into this episode. Hey y'all, welcome back to the show. I am super excited today to introduce you to Amelia. And I can't wait. We've already been chit-chatting a little bit, and I was like, no, let's stop and get on because it's going to be so good. So welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks. It's really great to be here, Robin.
So for those of you listening, this is not my average conversation because Amelia's got a very exciting life. But I'm going to have her tell you a little bit about where she is, what she, who she is, and then we're going to kind of get into some of her amazing things that she's done in her life so far.
Well, hi, I'm Amelia Ellenstein, and there are probably two things that you'd like to know about me. First is what I do in my professional life, and the second is what I do in my personal life. And then I think Robin and I are going to talk about how we bring that all together.
That's right.
So in my professional life, I'm a brand strategist, and I help founders, CEOs, and solo entrepreneurs align what they believe with what they do to create purpose-driven businesses that they love. And it's a completely mobile business. And that's important because of what I do in my personal life, which is that I am a long distance adventurer. So when I'm not working with clients, I am traveling by foot or by paddle or by 4x4, exploring the United States and the world.
Which I absolutely love and find fascinating. And for all of my listeners, they know that that is part of health and wellness, which is kind of my little sector that I love to chat about. And so I want to talk about your living life, and then we'll talk about your career. What kind of propelled you to go on that adventure? Like, were you always that way? Did you grow up that way? Or was this something you just were like, I want to do this because it feels good? And
it's a good question. And I've thought a lot about that because I made a really dramatic change in my life when I turned 40. For 20 years, I had a really stressful, intense corporate life. I was a senior leader at a billion-dollar company. We're regularly working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And I loved my life for a really long time. But when I approached my 40th birthday, I realized that my life was totally out of balance, that I really wasn't paying attention to all of the true callings that I had. And I thought back a lot to the things that brought me joy, not just when I was growing up, but on my weekends and in my time off. And what resonated the most for me was the spirit of adventure. And it became really clear that I had a longing and a gap in my life to fill this desire for the spirit of adventure. And so when I turned 40, my husband and I made really significant changes in our life in order to be able to pursue both my professional passions and our personal passions, which was to pursue these really long distance, multi-month, kind of crazy adventures. And so we redid our life in order to be able to do both of those. And that spirit of adventure for me really comes from being a little girl. I grew up in a family where we went on adventures, where we hopped in the four-wheel drive truck and drove out into the desert with a map, trying to find interesting new places that hadn't been discovered before. And so for me, that seed of exploration was really planted as a little girl. And as I climbed that corporate ladder, it was a different kind of adventure, but I was inside all day long, under fluorescent lights all day long. And I began to feel this greater and greater disconnect from this essential part of who I am, which is a part of nature. And I wanted to rekindle that.
I love that. And there's so much good stuff right there. So, first of all, I think most of us grew up in a time and are still growing up in a time where the conditioning that we received was you go to school, you get a degree, you work, you climb the ladder, your success is at the top of that ladder. And that is not true.
Mm-mm.
And I think and I hope that this new generation coming up behind us is seeing that and will do things a little bit differently, not extreme, but just a little bit differently, because it really does start to affect your health down the road. And so for you to recognize that at the age of 40-ish or before 40, that's a scary leap because it's what you knew.
Mm-hmm.
It provided you your lifestyle that you were used to, and you get accustomed to those things. But I think it's so fascinating that you started to recognize, and I think and I'm calling that like the beginning of middle age,
Mm-hmm.
that there is something missing. There is a disconnect, but you're so busy for so long on the straight and narrow that you don't think about or allow yourself to have the time of thinking of those things. But there is a shift that happens 40s up until, later in the midlife chapter where I feel like, God just kind of sprinkles little things in and says, nope, you need to look at this, or nope, remember this, or, so I feel like it's a cool opportunity
Mm-hmm.
to go back and figure out again what used to light you up.
Mm-hmm.
And you did just that, and you did it. What I want to say to everybody is it's possible, right? I love your story because it is a 180, but it's possible. You're still enjoying yourself. You're still thriving. You're still able to live and survive. And you're probably happier. This is encouraging. Like we should
Mm-hmm.
all be excited to start again during our self exploration time that we have every day. Start like asking yourself those questions. What used to light me up? What
Mm-hmm.
was it that I was attracted to? Why haven't I done that in so many years? Was it
Mm-hmm.
because you were momming, because you were working, because you were ignoring yourself? And I think getting like delayering
Mm-hmm.
really is helpful for women out there trying to make these next steps. So I think it's super cool. And I love that you and your husband didn't allow your success or your corporate climb to stifle you guys pivoting and doing something completely different. So in doing that and recognizing the fluorescent lights and recognizing you really belong to nature, still what you guys are doing is very, I'm not going to say extreme, but very outside of the box.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you just not go live out in the woods, or just, like pick a place that's more adventurous like you did when you grew up where you could just take the little trips? Like what
Mm-hmm.
really propelled you to not have a quote unquote home space?
Mm-hmm. Well, we didn't start out totally nomadic in the beginning.
Okay.
I was given some great advice by a very close friend of mine. When I was going through this process, as I started to have these questions and I started to have these feelings bubble up that I was discovering this disconnect in my life that I wanted to reconnect, I started reaching out to mentors and having conversations. And that included friends that I admired. And it also included strangers that I just picked up the phone and called and wanted to learn about how they lived and why they lived that way. And a friend of mine said to me, follow your excitement. He said, listen to your excitement. If you feel the tiniest little reverberation around an idea, just follow it. Don't wait for a plan. Follow
Mhm.
your excitement and figure it out as you go. And that advice was game changing for me because at the beginning of this evolution, I felt a lot of fear about making the change because I felt like I needed to have a plan,
Mhm.
right? I felt like I
Right.
needed to have it all figured out before I retired. I needed to have it all figured out before I told my friends and family that we were going to make this dramatic change. And when he said, follow your excitement, what I realized was that I didn't have to have it all figured out. I just needed to know what I was excited about and trust that that excitement would lead me to the next thing. And it did. And so what happened was instead of having a really clear plan, we had a short-term plan. We said, okay, what are we going to do for the first 6 months? Right. And we decided to go to Hawaii. And so we planned out those first 6 months. We didn't sell our house at first. We rented it out to friends and we started out with a short-term plan. And as we got into this new way of living, I remembered my friend's advice, follow my excitement. And so as we got into it 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, I kept a journal and I paid really close attention to my excitement. And as I did that, I began to create a plan because I had more and more clarity around what my desires truly were. So it wasn't, even though it was dramatic, true, right? To say, hey, I'm a vice president at $1 billion company. No thanks, I'm out, right?
Mm.
And that was really hard for my community to understand because they only knew me as this executive corporate person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was shocking on one level, but at the same time, we took baby steps as we moved into this new lifestyle. And so I think a message that's really was important for me to hear, and is the story I'm telling, and is a message that I hope other people hear. The whole plan doesn't have to be fully formed. What's important is that we learn to tune into our excitement and we say, that's the thing that's lighting me up, right? To use your language, and to trust that that excitement is leading us toward the plan.
It's so interesting you say all that because that is really my morals and values of change
Mm,
in general. When
mm,
you're changing like health and wellness, you can't make a 180 overnight. We've been doing something one way for so long. And so that is why I created the 1% shift method,
mm,
because it is about taking those very small incremental steps based on excitement, based on
mhm,
what feels really good to you inside. And I think for so long, we have really tuned out our own intuition and
mhm,
we've just been doing like life as people conditioned us to do. And I'm
mhm,
just all about undoing some of that. And so one of the things that you said is that I want to ask you about is like an inward practice being an important piece for forward process. So
mhm,
if you want to just touch on that, because I think that's 100% accurate and very true.
mhm.
And I want to hear your take on it.
Well, that's an essential pillar of how I live my life.
Mhm.
And it's really what I have discovered is important for me to have balance in my life. That I need to have a combination of process, which would be the plan, right? It's the goal, it's the identification of what I'm working to achieve. And it's the step by step action items, the calendar, the to do list, the milestones, right? The
Right.
budget, the
Yeah.
team, right? That's the process. That's going to get the work done. But if I only focus on the process, what I end up with is productivity and achievement that doesn't mean very much by the time I achieve it. So I have to couple that forward process with inward practice. And when I do that, when I bring practice into my everyday goal pursuit, what happens is I increase my experience of fulfillment. I don't delay my satisfaction until I cross the finish line, which actually doesn't work.
Right.
Right?
That's
Because
right.
right now we're alive. Right now I'm living. And so if I delay my fulfillment, I may never achieve it, or I diminish the quantity of fulfillment that I can experience in my life. And so that inward practice coupled with that forward process is what I need to feel truly satisfied by any of the things that I pursue, by any of my achievements and any of my ambition.
Right. And I think this goes back to the story that I hear a lot of times is that I did the things, I
Mhm.
got the degree, I
Mhm.
climbed the ladder just to
Mhm.
get to the top to think, what is this?
Mhm.
Like, this is not fulfilling. And I think you're right. It's because along the way, they haven't been nurturing themselves, listening to themselves. They've been disconnected, if you will. And
Mhm.
so, when I work with clients, a lot of the time at the beginning of it is really spent doing that inward. Like, what was your story?
Mhm.
What were you told? Or does that serve you any longer? How does that work for you? Like really reminding people that most of the answers lie within, most of the, agency is all within you. We just have to get curious enough to listen in, to
Mhm.
ask the questions, to get curious and be okay to pivot. And so I
Mhm.
love that. I love the connection of the progress and the productivity, the motion has to be coupled with the inward practices of knowing yourself in order
Mhm.
when you get to that whatever the goal is, you would feel and again, it goes back to like a lot of times when people say, well, these are my goals. Right. And it's like, well, how do you want to feel when you get to those goals? Because it's
Mhm.
not just about the goal, because what's the goal about? And so
Mhm.
once they're like, that's always a very unusual question for most people because they don't think of goals like that. But it's like, what do you want to feel like? Or why do you want to get to that goal? Like, what's really driving you? And then it's giving them permission, if you're going to feel, I don't know, let's just say more connected to yourself or more Well, why can't you do that every day? Let's do it every day. Oh my gosh,
Mhm.
what if we felt connected to ourselves every single day rather than waiting 6 months till you're done with the program or waiting
Mhm.
till you get to the finish line of a marathon? It's like, no, we got that backwards. We got to live our feelings out how we want to feel on a daily, and that will keep you aligned with where you're supposed to be going, I think. So,
I think so too. And there are two experiences in my life that really taught me this lesson. The first was absolutely my corporate career and continuing to climb the ladder and pursue a goal and having it feel less and less satisfied, having it feel less and less like my actions were truly myself.
mm,
And that's what sort of sparked this thinking for me. And as my husband and I grew in our relationship, he's an athlete, and we both became interested in long distance sports and long distance adventures. And I started crewing for him and crewing for other athletes that do these crazy intense athletic goals, like 325-mile triathlons over 3 days. So, not small things, big
right.
things that take 2 years to train for, and a whole crew, right, to support you. And as a crew chief, what I would observe is that athletes would train for 2 years to show up for an event. Then they would pour their heart out over 325, 326 miles over 3 days. Some of them would just suffer through it, right?
Mm,
And then they would get to the finish line, and that celebration would last for 15 minutes. And
mhm.
then everybody would be exhausted and go home and go to bed. And I would watch this process happen as a crew chief and as a supporter of athletes. And I would think to myself, wow, 2 years of time was just invested for a 15-minute celebration.
Right.
And that to me didn't add up. And in fact, lots of athletes would talk about the entire experience as a sufferfest. And I was talking to a mentor in that space, and he said, no, Amelia, the goal is to feel good. And feeling good may be a sliding scale. What you need to do at the starting line to feel good is different than what you need to do 200 miles in to feel good, right?
Right.
Feeling good at 200 miles in might be taking care of blisters, eating a Snickers bar, taking a 5-minute nap, and giving yourself a pep talk, right?
Right. Right.
Okay, so feeling good is a little bit different, but the goal is to feel good, not to suffer. And as I thought about these ideas, we headed off to Hawaii. And I was introduced to the Hawaiian practice of making lei. And through that art form, I was introduced to 7 sacred practices. And those became the practices that made me stand back and say, wow, when I was in corporate America, if I would have known these 7 practices, how would my work have looked different? How would my forward process have looked different? Wow. When I was a crew chief, working, supporting as a volunteer athletes in these giant goals that they have, training for 2 years, suffering through it for 3 days, celebrating for 15 minutes, I would have known about these 7 practices. How would that have looked different? How would the fulfillment, the satisfaction, and the joy with that combination of practice and process transformed the process to be something truly fulfilling? And so it was those 3 experiences that really came together for me over a period of 4 or 5 years, where I had the aha moment and realized that it was that combination of process and practice that really was where the magic was for me.
And so as you're speaking, and I love that, and I can't wait to get into these 7, but one of the things that keeps coming up for me is moms really have done a lot of processes, right, through the years of momming,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of the inward stuff got kind of shoved to the side or ignored. And when those start to kind of come alive again and you start to recognize about the inward work and like how you do that, I think it is so exciting to then be able, like you said, if I applied this, then how would it have looked different?
Mm-hmm.
But you can't ever go back, right?
Nope.
So let's apply this to this new chapter. And that's what we
Mm-hmm.
talk about a lot is like, we're going to show up differently now because we know a little bit differently. We did an amazing job at momming. I mean, momming's, it's a great job. It's a hard job. It's challenging. It really shows you your shadows. It's all the things. And you made it through. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yay. Okay. That is a celebration and a win. But now, and I think some of the practices you're going to talk about are things that we talk about. We're going to change and do it a little differently so that these two things kind of mesh up and are aligned. So, if
Mm-hmm.
you would like to share the 7 practices or your favorite ones and whatnot, I know you have a book, right?
Mm-hmm. I do. I have a book. I've written a book called The Sacred Effort: How to Reclaim Your Creative Power and Ditch Relentless Productivity. And it should
Love
be
that.
coming out next year. And
Yes.
in the book, I talk about the concepts of ambition and
Mm.
how do we make our ambition, whatever that ambition is, fulfilling for us, right?
Yeah, I love that.
And really, when I think about ambition, ambition to me is a creative force. Ambition isn't about striving, right? And I think that, at least in our American culture, we're taught that ambition is about striving. It's about having more of whatever, right?
It's always the more. It's
It's
always
always
more
the
of
more.
whatever,
Hmm.
right? Not
Right.
the, the creative endeavor.
And the truth is that ambition is an expression of our creativity. It's how we create our lives. It's how we pursue our desires, regardless of what that desire is, whether that's the desire for more or a desire for less, it doesn't matter, right? It's the pursuit of a goal. And so for me, when I think about ambition, that's where it starts to break down into being equal parts of process and practice. And in the book, I propose this new idea of ambition, that ambition is actually not about striving, that ambition is a creative force to build the life that we desire, whatever that life is. And that when we couple these 7 practices with forward process, then we experience the greatest level of fulfillment possible out of our ambition. And that ambition truly contributes to our life in a healthy and positive way. And I want to be really clear that I'm not suggesting that ambition is bad. I think ambition is amazing. And I think that creating and pursuing gigantic, big, amazing goals is a really important part of being human.
Yes,
But,
absolutely.
right? So ambition for me isn't a dirty word. It's about reframing ambition to be something
Yes.
that contributes to our life in exactly the way that we want it to. So I outlined the 7 practices that I was able to learn through the process of lay making. And the first is to envision, right? We have to start with a very clear vision for our goal. And that vision is really a declaration of our future self, right?
Yeah.
Who do we want to become? What do we want to be? Let's declare it now so that we can move into it. If we aren't clear on what we want to move into, it's difficult to get there. The second practice is intention, which you referenced earlier in our conversation, Robin, which is to start with the experience. We need to ask ourselves before we begin, how do we want to feel? What is the experience that we are trying to create with this ambition, with this goal? The third is ritual. We can use our routine to make our life deliberately non-ordinary, right?
Yeah.
We can look at the things that we do in repetition already every day and find out how to make them special so that they become enjoyable as opposed to a drag or a drain. We can reach out to a community, which I believe is the ultimate act of self-love. When we ask for
Yes.
help, right? When we say, I would like to learn from you, I'm struggling, I need help from you, right? I'm looking for wisdom. Do you have it? Right? It's the ultimate act of self-love to reach out to our community and to ask for help. The fifth practice is what I call R and R and R, right? We've all heard of R and R, right? Which is rest and recovery, but I add a third R, which is reflection.
Yes. I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Good.
right. We have to pause and say, whoa, am I where I thought I would be? Am I feeling how I wanted to feel? Am I doing what I set out to do? Right? We have to build that in, because if we don't put that on the calendar and build it in, we all know it'll never happen because there will never be time. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So R and R and R, which is reflection. The sixth practice is embodiment. Our body is a source. Our body contains our emotions. Our body contains our energy, right? When we learn to look inward and listen to the messages from our body, we learn about how we are doing in pursuit of a goal, right? Do we need to rest? Do we feel excitement that we need to follow? These are all signals and cues that are tools in our toolkit in order to understand and pursue our passions wholeheartedly. And the last practice is a practice of place. The developing view of who we are is formed in the spaces that surround us. A place can be a teacher. And when we're mindful about the places of our goal, the way we put together our office, right? The way we go outside in order to pursue our goal, when we purposefully choose a place for our ambition, then we allow that place to teach us in the process.
Okay, so much goodness there, and so much. I mean, I knew we were aligned, but so much alignment between like so many things. And so, oh gosh, there's so much I want to touch on because I talk all the time about rituals, routines. It's what sets you up, right? It's what really sets you up to have your most productive day, to feel your best, to show up your best. These things, they're just the rituals and the routines are, doesn't have to be grandiose, things. It's just the small little things that you put in place to remind yourself of who you are, where you're going, and how you want to actually put intention around things. And so doesn't cost anything except for a little bit of time. If you don't have a lot of time, do it before your feet hit the ground in the morning. Don't look at your phone. There's always, if there's a will, there's a way. And I love when people say, I don't have time. I'm like, show me your phone and I'll show you there's time.
I'll show you all the time.
Community. Especially as like we come up into this midlife chapter, your community shifts because if you were momming, a lot of those mom friends disappear, go do their own thing because you're no longer on the soccer team. You're no longer doing those kind of life things together. Not a bad thing. And not that you aren't friends with them anymore. It's just your worlds change. So I think people, you're like you said, people need community to thrive, really. And so it's forming a new community in this chapter that's going to help you to have the self-love, right, for yourself by putting yourself into communities that can uplift you and see you and hear you right where you're at. And I think so often, especially with things that have happened within our world in the last 10 years, there's a lot less community going on. And I think that's a big shift. And I hope in this near future that society-wise, we change a little bit because I think it's really needed. And I hope this next generation coming up really sees what and how profound community really is. I was laughing when you said R, and R because I'm doing a self-care challenge right now, and it's 4 weeks. And so every Sunday is rest and reflect.
Oh, wonderful.
And so, it's all about that. And my community for moms is R and R, which is raw and real. It's really funny. And again, you have to rest, right? You have to take time out of the chaos because no matter what you're doing, whether you're a nomad or whether you're at corporate America, you still have to create the time to rest and reflect. Because if you don't, you almost get off track of like knowing what you're doing. It's almost like being in a scattered land.
Yes.
Because you don't know which road you're going to take next because there's no time to process and reflect. Like, would this one be a better choice or would this one be, or maybe I just stay the narrow, it's like, but we forget to take the time to pour into ourselves, to check in. How do you feel? What's your intuition saying, and all of those things. And I absolutely loved like your whole talk about the embodiment and tuning in and following and building your toolbox. And, that's a huge conversation. And why I do this podcast ultimately, because every person that I interview comes with wisdom and knowledge that somebody else didn't have. What resonates for one doesn't resonate for another. So my interview style is so that people can pick and choose what actually resonates with them, put it in their toolbox and have it for later on whenever they might need it. And so it's not, I'm going to follow every single thing she's saying. I'm going to do everything. It's like, no, what resonates with you about what Amelia is saying? Which part of this can you take away today that feels good for you? Try it on, do a little practice, get curious. How does it shift you? Which part of your wellness are you working on, primary, secondary, and really have the conversations with yourself so that you can see, is this ultimately something I want to add into my toolbox that is up leveling my vitality in life for this next chapter?
It's so true. I wish I knew where this saying came from. I'm sure it's someone incredibly wise and ancient, which is when the student is ready, the teacher appears, right?
Oh, yes. Yes.
And I find that when we do what you're suggesting, when we expose ourselves to lots of points of view about how to live, right?
Yes.
And how to be connected, what happens is we take from our own perspective, the pieces of wisdom that fit for us. And we
Yes, like a
create,
puzzle.
like a puzzle, and we create our own wisdom about how we want to live, informed by these different teachers.
Yes, and I think the one of the things that has disrupted that ability is the fact that in our society, it has been said to us, you go to this doctor, they know best, you do. I mean, my mom, if my doctor said jump off the bridge, we were jumping off the bridge, right? Like she just, whatever he said, we did. And I think through my experience of my own stuff and my children's things, that did not work for me. And so I was more of the like, no, I'm going to take this little piece from you. We're done here. I'm moving on to this person. And again, because there's not one person that knows everything.
Mm-mm.
And so that's what makes the world go round. You know, you've researched enough on this, or this makes sense to you. But again, it's always going back and checking in with yourself and how that feels for you. One thing that just literally popped in my mind was an experience where a professional told me to, oh, just take like a cap full of bleach and just put it in the water. And well, that was our last visit there, because I'm like, well, obviously you don't know me well because I don't bleach my clothes either. Why would I stick my daughter with this in there? But up until then, maybe he served a purpose. But at that crossroad, I was like, we are no longer aligned. So I'm going to go off and find somebody else that understands my thought process a little bit better and what I want for my child. And that's what we did. But for so long, that was like not a good thing, because then you were going against, and it was like, no, I'm just picking a different part. I just need a different piece. That puzzle piece isn't working right now. So, and I think again, that goes back to tuning inward and your intuition. What is that telling you? Does that sit well with you? What's the feel? I want my child to feel good. So this conversation needs to happen more often. And people like you that have tuned into yourself, heard what yourself was saying, and then said, well, I've got to do something different, because you cannot get a different result doing the same thing over and over. You've got to do something different. That's a big message to anybody that's, working and momming, not working, in corporate, no kids. It's all the same. It's like we have to really start to dig a little bit. So I love this. So great.
And I think it's okay. I want to be sure that I remind myself, and that also other people hear the message, that it's okay if other people don't understand at first.
Absolutely. 100%.
Because part of the process of making a change in one's life means that we're redefining ourselves. And when we redefine ourselves, other people then have to figure out who we are now, right?
Yes.
We no longer fit their definition of who we are. And so there will be this period of time where things feel disjointed, right? Where maybe relationships don't quite have the same energy that they used to be, that they used to contain, right? That doesn't mean that we're headed in the wrong direction. It just means we're changing, right? And so we're beginning to feel that resistance of change. It's not a bad sign. It's a good sign that the change is happening, right?
Yes.
And so being prepared that that's a part of the experience, that it's not just an internal question that might come up. There are external questions that might come up too. Those aren't red flags. Those are green flags saying you're on the path to change. This is a part of the process.
Yes. I think you have to have a little bit of uncomfortableness to grow, really. And to really, I think what that does when you are shifting in someone else's eyes is allowing you to stand in what you believe and what works for you, and having to say that out loud, which can be challenging if you've not been someone who's done that. And I think that happens for everybody sometime in their life. All your life, there have been little nudges of things that have happened where you've had to pivot because it didn't work anymore. And, I have two older girls, 21 and 18. And I often say, some friends come for a season, some come for a particular reason, and some stay forever, and some wane. They go in, they go out, they come back. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that you like somebody less or don't like somebody. It doesn't mean you have to be, quote unquote, not friends with somebody. But sometimes when we start to expand and other people aren't on that same expansion wavelength, they'll either catch up, or we'll meet them somewhere else in time where they've done different work, but we've met back up. So, and I was telling my kids, like a lot of people that I was friends with in elementary school, we all kind of did our own thing, went through life. And now we're in this different chapter, different season, and we're more back together because we're more aligned right now.
Mm.
So throughout the other things, there was lots of things that we, neither one of us were probably in alignment with, but we had kind of spaced out already. So it really wasn't a thing. Um, because again, I think people think like it's one person forever, and in friendship, that's not always the case. With your spouse or with your significant other, hopefully communication, you both sort of keep pressing and moving, and you help each other, right? If that's more of a like a I'm here to help you expand, and then you're going to help me expand, and then I'm going to help you expand, and maybe we'll expand sometimes together, but a lot of times it's not exactly at the same time. So it's the dance, I call it. It's the
I love
dance of
that.
growth.
Hmm. And the dance of relationships. Hmm.
Yes, in all relationships. So tell everybody where you are at right now, because I mean, on this nomad adventure, maybe your top 3 things that you've done so far on this adventure. I'd love to hear if you'd like
Sure.
to share.
So at this exact moment, I'm just south of the border of Wyoming in northern Colorado. A friend of ours owns an apple orchard, and we came for the fall harvest. So last week we picked 3,000 apples and made, I can't even tell you how many gallons of apple cider.
Oh,
So that's where we are at the moment. One of the truths about our nomadic life that I really love is that we're able to show up for our friends and our family in ways that we couldn't before. And so we're able to be present when people need us to be present. And that's a real gift.
that's
My
huge.
my top 3 adventures over the last 7 years since we started this nomadic lifestyle. The first long distance through hike that I did with my husband was 2,193 miles on the Appalachian Trail.
Oh my gosh,
So
that's
my
so
husband,
amazing.
yep. So
Where
my
did you guys
husband and I
start?
hiked. We started in Georgia, which is the
Uh-huh.
southern
Yeah.
start of the trail, and we hiked all the way up to Mount Katahdin in Maine. And we did it in one big 6-month hike. So that was the first like real adventure that we did together. And I have so many warm, wonderful memories from the challenges of that experience. The
That's
second
a very
adventure,
nice way to put it. I really like that. I'm thinking, I know that whole 6 months wasn't all joy. I'm
no,
sure that there
no,
was.
no, 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 it was not all joy at
I
all.
love it.
I tease people because when my husband gets low on calories, he gets hangry. And when I get low on calories, I get emotional. And so if those 2 things happen at the same time, it's a real disaster. So that's a part of doing that stuff with your spouse, right?
That's awesome.
My second adventure that I really made a huge impact on my life. 2 years ago, we paddled the Mississippi River. We started at the source in Minnesota, and we paddled all the way down to the bayous of Louisiana and the Gulf of Mexico. That's also about 2,200 miles, and that took 3 months of paddling to accomplish
Wow.
that goal. And
So
that was
like in between the paddles, did you get out and sleep in a hotel? Because no, it's
camping.
all
Yep.
just camping.
We
Okay.
camped, and there's a beautiful system of community along the Mississippi River. The
Okay.
Mississippi River is known in the United States as being
Yes.
a center of community, and we experienced that to be true. So we were welcomed and embraced by strangers who invited us into their homes. And so we would meet people on the banks of the river, and they would say, you're voyagers, you're paddling. Do you need a hot meal and a bed and a shower? How could we turn that down?
Right.
And so the Mississippi River taught me a lot about community. If the Appalachian Trail taught me about my personal strength, the Mississippi River taught me about community.
Did you find community on the Appalachian?
Yes.
Yeah, because I was gonna say there's its own different, but same.
Yes. And more on the trail in terms of
right.
other hikers. And what was special about the Mississippi River is that it was the people off the river
That's cool.
that were coming to help strangers. It was really beautiful, and it was such a powerful reminder of how much no matter what the news says, the world is filled with love, and people want to be in community with each other. That's what the Mississippi River taught me and reminded me.
I love that.
And then my third adventure, which has been incredibly profound in my life, was the opportunity to spend time in Hawaii and to be touched by the culture there and to be introduced to the practice of lei making, because it helped me understand the 7 practices that I now incorporate into every goal that I pursue. And that understanding of how practice enriches our life and increases our fulfillment has been game changing for the way that I live my life and the way that I interact with the world around me. And I wouldn't be who I was today without that experience.
I love that. And, I really, as you said, no matter what news portrays, I really just, there's so many days where I'm just like, just put one good story on the news. Like, just put one
Mhm.
good community on, like, just give people like, because there is that out there. And I
Mm,
tell my husband all the time, like, podcasting for me has been life changing because of the people that I get to meet,
mm,
like you, and see how other people live and their beliefs and their practices. But the one commonality and the thread that runs through everyone is the love for other people,
mm,
and the real genuine want to give back and serve other people in a way that's going to elevate them and not bring them down. And I
mhm,
said, and that's why I do what I do. And so
mhm,
I'm so excited that we crossed paths. I'm so excited that you got to come on my show and that other people can hear your amazing story. And what I want everybody to leave with is, maybe you don't have a dramatic shift like this if this isn't your cup of tea,
mhm,
but it's something. Like, think about something that has been pulling at you for years that you just have dismissed, and start to get curious about it, and, you know, start to go through what your goals are for this next chapter, and use these 7 practices and 7 things to really get in alignment so that you're heading in a direction that's just going to elevate yourself. Because when
mhm,
you're elevated, you elevate people around you, your kids will elevate, your grandkids will elevate, and, we will serve people, in a much more with more resource
mm,
and love and
mm,
fulfillment, I feel.
mhm. I think you're right. And that's what I try to do in both my professional life and my personal life is be focused on this word alignment, right?
Mhm,
Which
yeah.
you've just used. And be sure that my beliefs are fully aligned in the work that I do and the way that I live my life. And when that alignment is in place, then I'm my most joyful, right? I'm
Mhm,
my most authentic. I'm able to have my strongest creative power and live a life that's as original as I am with confidence, right?
mhm.
And that shows up when I'm doing it right, which I don't always do, right? That shows up across the entire spectrum of my life, whether I'm working with clients as a brand strategist or I'm formulating my own goals. And so I love that word that you've used, alignment, because for me, that's what the key is. And I am so glad that we got to talk today, that we got to meet each other more deeply because there is so much synergy between our belief system. Thank you for sharing this time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been amazing. So I just have to ask, from a curiosity
Yeah.
standpoint, when you're out on these excursions,
Mhm.
and you're working with people, how does that work?
Oh, it's a great question. So I structure my life in a hybrid way. So
Okay.
I have periods of time where I am very intensely working with clients. I have just come off of an adventure and I'm about to move into a 4-month period of time where I have engagements booked and I'll be working exclusively with clients. And even though I'll still be nomadic, I won't be out on the trail and unplugged. Right. So I might move from Colorado to Southern California to New Mexico, but I will be totally plugged in into the
Nice.
world during that time period working with clients. Then I move into a pre-planned period of time where I'm totally off the grid, where I close my client work and I block out my calendar for whatever period of time is necessary for that adventure, right? Could be anywhere from 3 months to 6 months. And I go off the grid. And then when I come back, I move into another cycle. And I found that that arrangement serves not only my goals, but my clients best because they're able to get my intense focus from start to finish, where we move them through the process that I use. And I have a very specific process that I use that has a very clear timeline. And so I'm able to work with people in these batches and help them accomplish their goals and then move unplugged in order to accomplish my own personal goals after that.
I love that. I love the word unplug that you use, because a lot of times in my community, we talk about doing just that,
Mm,
whatever day, 1 day a week, 2 days a week, three
mhm,
days a week, like, just maybe just a few hours a day, whatever it is, really getting that on your calendar, ingraining that in your brain, making it a habit
Mhm,
so that you do have that unplugging time.
mhm,
But what I love about what you're doing is you're running your own life. You're allowing yourself to work to support yourself, to really help people, serve people in a way, but you're also allowing yourself to do what feels most authentic to you, which is also to very much unplug and get in nature.
mhm,
And I think again, there's a balance, and it's however you want to balance. But I
mhm.
love your decision, right, to balance in chunks because I think it's cool. And because we can be remote, because that was given to us as an opportunity through a challenge, we can structure our lives so much differently. And that's something
However
like
we
my
want.
husband and I are talking about because, he works, fully from home now. So
Mhm,
it's like, well, we don't have to particularly be one like place, right? So what does that look like for the next 10 years while we're kind of unwinding from that lifestyle, right? Until we get
mhm,
to retirement. And then what does that look like after retirement? And who knows, so it's like all these, we're in this new planning phase of like what's next for us and how does that look? And so it's exciting. And it's also like, okay, but we have to remember this piece or, so it's a lot of conversations that it's bringing
mhm,
up. But I do think that the virtual aspect of life can have its benefits if
mhm.
used properly.
Absolutely, and it was really important to me when I founded this agency that it be completely mobile, and so I work with people virtually and I travel to them, right?
Which is cool.
And
Right.
because I'm totally mobile, I'm able to do that. I can be exactly where my clients need me to be when they need me to be there because I don't have a home that's keeping me in a
So,
specific place. So I serve clients all across the United States. And I find that, hey, if I'm going to be a brand strategist and I'm going to own a brand strategy agency where I help people find alignment between what they believe and what they do in their business, I better walk the talk.
right.
And so if I don't create a business that is as original as I am, right, and doesn't create alignment in my life for my passions and the way that I want to live, that I'm not setting a very good standard.
Right. True.
But it's possible to create. And so I think it's important that people understand that we can create the structure for a business and for a life any way that we want to create that. And
Which
you're
is
right,
new. It's a
it's
newer
new.
thought process because I mean, I'm thinking of my dad's and even my husband, you know, more so my dad, like, no way. Like that would never have been a thing. Like he was on a very straight and narrow because that's all that they knew. And my husband's more similarly, he's kind of adjusted because of the whole working online and things like that. But I think this next generation coming up, they
Mm,
have much more of that mindset already plugged into them just from their life of being brought up that I think they're going to take it to a whole nother level of and I think the one thing I don't want them to forget about, which is something you mentioned, was the community piece, because that's so, so important, no matter what you're doing, to be in a community of people serving up whatever it is you are passionate about so that you can grow with them. So I love it. And this conversation's been so cool and enlightening, and I've really loved getting to know you. But I have to ask, what is one of your non-negotiables that you created over this year, 7 years you've been doing this, that really helps you to keep yourself elevated, well, and living a vibrant and healthy life?
Well, we talked about it at the beginning of this conversation, and it's the commitment to both process and practice.
I love that.
If I find that I'm focusing only on process, then I can feel myself moving out of balance. If I find that I'm focusing only on practice, then I start to feel frustrated, right? That I'm not accomplishing the big ideas that I have in my life. And so when I create the equal blend of forward process and inward practice, that's the non negotiable for me that makes me feel most balanced in who I am.
I love that. That's so awesome. And, for those of you listening, this conversation really is all about primary foods. It's all about feeding our soul off of our plate. And when you really hone in and start doing some of those things naturally, you're going to be fueling your body
Mm.
different, through
Mhm.
food and de-stressing and all of the things that, feed us over here on this soul level
Mhm.
really does then impact that secondary, food choices and things like that. So this episode's really amazing, and it's all more on the primary side, and I love that.
Mm.
So thank you so much again for coming on. If you're leaving today, I know for sure that you've got lots of things you can take away, but this whole episode is really thinking about what is something that resonated with you, what is 1% that you can walk away with, maybe a new tool or a new tip, or maybe thinking about the blend of the two, of the process and going inward and all of that. And, what is something you're going to do differently to try on, to make sure that this chapter of your life is something that you want to celebrate.
Mm.
And if you guys want to respond, you can always send an email to me on Instagram and let me know, because I'm always so curious to see what people take away from amazing episodes like this. Thanks so much, Amelia, again for coming on.
Thank you.
That episode had so many great takeaways. I hope you feel inspired and more empowered to make small 1% shifts on your wellness journey this week. I'd love to hear what resonated with you. If you want to leave a review, share your thoughts, and let me know how you're going to be implementing these 1% shifts into your life. And don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with another mama who could use a little wellness love. Want to stay connected? Join me on Instagram and Facebook at Live Life Balanced with Robin. Check out my website at livelifebalancedwithrobin.com for more resources, and grab yourself some freebies while you're there. Until next time, I hope you find peace, love, and light by breathing, being present, and allowing for all possibilities to come your way. See y'all next week. Love to y'all.